welcome to the Art of Being Human. Today I want to go into the drug schedules, and I mentioned it a little bit before, but I really want to get into it this time. What is a drug schedule? Well, when drugs are being manufactured, the manufacturer chooses the name, they have to know how much addictive potential is there to this drug? How much time do you have to take it before your body decides that it needs it to the point where your brain is not willing to give it up? Most prescriptions, you take the prescription, and when you're finished with it, you're finished with it. You know, that's all there is to it. You've gained what you're going to gain from it, and unless it's a drug that you need to take repeatedly because you have a chronic condition and you'll always need to take the drug, then when you finish taking the drug, you kind of forget about it. You toss the empty container out. You shouldn't be putting medications down the toilet if you haven't used them. They don't need to be in the water supply. There are receptacles that you can use to put drugs in that you no longer need, that you no longer want, so it clears the water system of it. But at any rate, how long can you take a drug before you're addictive? So the availability of a drug will depend upon its abuse potential. If it has a potential for a lot of abuse, then they won't give it to you very much. They won't give you much at a time, and you will not be able to get refills. If there's very little abuse potential, because most people just don't want to keep taking it forever, then you can take it for a longer period of time, and it's safe. So there is a schedule. They have put every drug on a schedule, and the schedule is numbered, like Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3, and so forth, so that when you have the drug or when the drug is prescribed for you, they know, the doctor knows, to begin with, how many times you can get a refill within what length of period of time. The number of refills that you can have within a number of time, the length of time that it's safe for you to use the drug. That's all been scheduled out for each particular drug. It's part of the research that goes on in terms of the safety of the drug, because not only does the drug have to do what it's supposed to do, but how long is it safe to take it? How much potential does it have for you to abuse it or to become addicted to it or for you to become dependent on it? How safe is this drug for how long a period of time? Is it safe? And when you some people take drugs, the same drugs for years. They can't seem to get off from it. Sometimes it's necessary because the drug is needed for years in order to achieve whatever it's doing that needs to be done. But also, some people just get in the habit of taking it, and without that drug, they don't think they can function. So they are now dependent upon that drug, emotionally dependent, but not necessarily physically addicted. When the addiction comes, of course, you can't continue with the drug because you can't stop it, and then you have to have more and more and more of it. Your life revolves around taking that drug, and people do get addicted to a lot of things. You know, people can get addicted to almost anything. I'm convinced of that. I read about a case where a lady was addicted to lettuce. How do you get addicted to lettuce? I mean, it's just like a leaf, right? But she did. She was addicted to lettuce, and she had lettuce everywhere she went. Well, fortunately for her, it's not going to be harmful. And if she was working at her office, she had lettuce in her desk. Every so often, she'd eat some lettuce. Well, if you're going to get addicted to anything, I suppose lettuce is the most safe thing you can get addicted to. But we're dealing with drugs here. What determines the length of time that you can take a drug? Well, it depends upon its potential for abuse and how long you can take it before it's no longer safe to continue to take it. So I want to review these schedules with you so you'll know what they are. Schedule 1. These drugs are illegal because there's a very high potential of abuse. You would become addicted quite quickly to it, and they're not produced for sale. Well, why would you schedule a drug that you're not going to sell. Well, it has to be on a schedule. They have to know which drugs are safe and which drugs are not safe, and what happens if you overdose on something that's not safe. Now, you realize with the drugs that the fentanyl and some of these drugs that people are getting addicted to and they're overdosing on, there are drugs that you can take to stop the symptoms of abuse and bring a person back, and responders do it all the time. But you see, even if you're taking something like heroin and you're addicted to heroin or cocaine, you can go to a drug clinic and they can give you methadone or some other kinds of drugs. Those drugs that they give you to stop a drug reaction are also addictive drugs. But the difference is this: you're not going to get high on them. So therefore, you can lead a normal life. You can take the drug and you can lead a normal life. They may be addictive, but they're not going to permanently mar your ability to get a job or to function as a normal human being. But they wouldn't be given unless you were already addicted to something else that will harm your life. So if you're on heroin or cocaine and you're in the point where you're not eating, you're not drinking, your body is failing and you're going to die, and they can stop that by giving you another drug which is also addictive, why not do it? Because it'll at least not get you high and keep you off the other drug, which is far worse than what they're giving you to stop the addiction. So at any rate, it's just something to think about. So Schedule 1, the drugs are illegal, not produced for sale, but at least they know what they are and the fact that they can't use them, and they are on that schedule. Now, Schedule 2, there is a high potential for abuse. It can lead to dependence and it can lead to addiction, but there is a medical use for it. On Schedule 1, there's no medical use for the drug. But on Schedule 2, there is medical use for the drug, and they can be prescribed by a doctor, but they cannot be renewed. That stops any addictive process. You get that drug, you take that drug, and then you can't get any more. You're not allowed anymore, and that will stop you from abusing the drug. People slip into drug abuse. They don't intend to be drug abusers, but they slip into it. They take too much of something, they find themselves caught in a web. They can't get out of that web. And so therefore it just progresses and gets downhill from there. By stopping a drug before you have a chance to become addicted to it, they stop that web. You never get any further into it because you can't take it anymore. But it may have a very important medical use. So while you're taking it, it's doing what it needs to do in your system and improving you. And then when the drug stops, you don't get any more. You have had the benefit of the availability that the drug manufacturer allows you to have, but you're not going to be overdosing on it either. So it's very, very carefully calibrated. I know psychiatrists who, because of abuse potential, mainly people who could be suicidal, would only allow patients to have like 5 pills because they couldn't, hoard the pills to the point where they could take enough so that they could kill themselves. And in some psychiatrists, being very careful, they would have to go to the office to take the drug. And then they would be administered that 1 pill, and they would have to go like for 5 days and get the pill that way. Anything to keep a person from overdosing. Now, I know that people sometimes, if they're suicidal, they will just hoard the pills. They don't take them, they just keep them. And then in a suicide, they take them all at the same time. And so they have enough drugs in their system to kill them, which is what they're doing. So what they do is they limit so much. They limit the drug to the point where you can't get enough to kill yourself. And so therefore, they could take that amount of drugs and no more on that prescription. Now, they might write you another prescription for something else. It's not as addictive, but this is the way it goes. If a person is suicidal, you have to protect them from themselves, because if you don't, you may lose them. And it's not ever a doctor's desire to have one of his patients die. Sometimes it happens. It is a risk when you're dealing with patients who are suicidal, because there's is always a chance that they're going to be able to do it somehow. But you have to be very careful of the medications that you give them, so you give them the least chance that they can to hurt themselves. So that's Schedule 2, high for potential for abuse, leads to dependence, but it does have a medical use, so you can take the prescription, you cannot get it refilled. Now, Schedule 3. Schedule 3 is a lower potential for abuse, but it can cause potential. It can be refilled 5 times in 6 months if the doctors order it. Okay, and it can't go any longer than that. So therefore, it's safer to use. It has a desired medical effect. It's safer to use, but you still put a stop to it before it gets to the point where you could possibly abuse it 5 times in 6 months. Schedule 4 has a lower potential for abuse. So the drugs that are scheduled with the higher numbers have a lower potential for abuse. And so therefore, it can be refilled 5 times in 6 months if the doctor orders. And so it goes like that. Now, by the time you get to Schedule 5, there's a low potential for abuse, and that would include small amounts of narcotics, like, for example, in cough syrup. You know, you could get a small amount of a narcotic in a cough syrup because you really want to kind of deaden the throat a little bit so you don't keep coughing. And they can be purchased. There's no limit to what you can buy. They can be purchased in any store. So they are scheduled for Schedule 5, but they're so safe that they don't put a limit on it. So you can buy what you need. And there is a little bit of a narcotic in it, but not a lot of a narcotic. I know some people, though, they're so needing drugs so much because of addictions, they will buy tons of cough syrup and just drink the whole thing down for the little amount that they get. People will try to find any way to get a drug if they need it, and that's the purpose of not having drugs on any kind of a schedule that's a lower numbered schedule, so people don't have that chance to get addicted to it. But if a person is addicted, they'll do anything. You know, there are lots of things that have alcohol in it. Now, what is denatured alcohol? Any kind of an alcohol that you buy, like rubbing alcohol, something like that, there's no schedule to it, but they add something to it so that if you do take it, you'll get very sick and you'll never repeat it. It'll make you sick so you won't keep drinking it all the time. But that makes it safe to use, because who wants to get sick and vomiting and getting ulcers and all of that stuff over having alcohol in your system? So rubbing alcohol is safe to use, because if you take too much, you're just going to get sick over it, and then you're not going to proceed any further. So you have to think in terms of all of the research that goes into drugs to find out if they're doing what they're supposed to do, to find out if there's a possibility of allergic reactions or drugs that can't be tolerated, or to find out if there's an addictive problem with it. Would you be able to be addicted? How long is it safe to take it? Is it doing, as I said before, what it's supposed to do? And does it do other things in addition to that? How does it react to other drugs that a person may be taking? For that matter, how does it react to vitamin pills? You know, because some people take high dosages of vitamin pills, and there could be a reaction there as well. So all of this has to be discovered. What if a woman is pregnant? Is there any effect on the baby? Well, sometimes they will allow a drug to market with a warning, if you are pregnant, don't take it, because we don't know if it's going to have an effect on the baby. We haven't been able to test it that much to be able to find out. So that's the caveat. That's the warning. Take it, but don't take it if you're pregnant. Now, the danger can be that people can be pregnant and not know it for any several weeks you can be pregnant and not know that you're pregnant. And you can be taking things that might be harmful for a baby, but you have no idea that you're pregnant yet. So this is something that happens, and you just have to be aware. You have to use your common sense. You know, drugs can be dangerous, or they can be very, very, very helpful. You have to know what's best to do. You have to go and get supervision. You have to rely upon your doctor's knowledge. Anyone who is prescribing medications will know what the schedules of the drugs are, how much you can take, how often you can take it, how long you can take it in terms of weeks or months or years, and stopping before there's any danger of getting addicted. And then you have to be aware of side effects, and you may be the only one out of millions of people that has a certain side effect. They do a lot of work with side effects. These are the side effects that you may get if you take the drug. Which side effects go away as your body adjusts, and which would progress to be dangerous where you wouldn't be able to take it because either one, you'd get allergic to it, which is dangerous, or you just can't tolerate the side effects of it. You know, lots of people have very, very sensitive bodies, and they can't take certain things. So all of this comes into play. And I know it sounds complicated, but it is complicated. And that's why we have drug researchers, and that's why we just don't allow drugs on the market without knowing for sure what it's going to be like. Now, drugs can act differently in your body. Sometimes their workings are not fully understood. Sometimes a drug or a vitamin can work, but nobody knows why it's working. Nobody knows the chemical process that's occurring in the system to make it work. Other times they do know. And also different drugs can act in different ways in different people. Elderly people and young people, babies and young children, don't react sometimes to the drugs the way that most normal adults would react. And so that has to be kept in mind. A child sometimes will react just the opposite of an adult. You see, a drug that would stimulate the adult and make them be more active would make a baby sleep, or vice versa. You know, sometimes babies and young children react just the opposite. The biochemistry is different. Your biochemistry changes as you grow and as you develop, and that biochemistry is just different enough that you don't act the same way on the drug as somebody else acts on the drug. So that has to be taken into consideration too. And it's in consideration for anyone who's marketing the drugs. You can't take it before you're 5 years old. Don't give it to young children. Only give 3 drops to young children. You can't take a full dose until you're 12 years old. And you'll see when you get any kind of a drug on the market, it'll give instructions as to the age. If a person's between 1 and 5 years old, 1 pill every 8 hours. If you're, say, from 12 to maturity, 2 pills every 6 hours. I mean, it actually does change because remember, your adults are bigger bodied, so therefore they have a larger blood supply, they have a larger circulatory system, and they're going to react a little differently than a child who is much smaller, and so therefore can't take as much because it would be too overpowering. Plus, sometimes the drugs just act differently at different age groups anyway, and that has to be accounted for. Now, sometimes what a drug will do is they'll replace chemicals in your system that are deficient. You need more of something and you don't have it. I'm thinking like of vitamin B shots and things like that. So it tries to replace what your deficient is, and it sometimes interferes with the functioning of cells because the cells react, especially in the brain, the cells react to it, and so therefore you have to be careful as to what they're doing, and because you can get hallucinations, you can get delusions, you can get some kinds of medications that might cause you to have a seizure or something like that. You have to be aware of the cell functions. Sometimes they act against an invading organism, for example, like an antibiotic or something that will stop an infection. That's necessary to get into the bloodstream to fight the infection. There are a lot of things that the drugs can do. So they have different effects on the body. Some of them work rapidly. Some of them work slowly over a period of time. And so you have to take them for a period of time, 6 months or so, before you get the full effect of the drug. And sometimes that's true with psychiatric drugs, where you may have to take the drug for 2 or 3 weeks before you notice a change, because they have to build up the level in the blood supply to a certain level before you get the effects of the drug on the brain. So it's not unusual for a doctor to give a prescription for a psychiatric drug to a person who's in trouble mentally and say it's going to be 2 weeks before you see much of a change. And then when it gets to a certain level in your system, then you'll see the change, and the change will be a good change. So you have to be aware of that. But you would be told that by your doctor before you took the drug, so you would understand that. And drugs, remember, will react with each other, and they may make medication stronger and be harmful. They may wipe out a medication and delete its effectiveness, so it's like you didn't take it to begin with. So drug interactions are critical. And during the research process, what they need to do, and what they do, is to check to see how a drug interacts with something else you might be taking, to make sure that that you're getting the effect from it that you're supposed to, and you're not getting too much, and you're not getting too little, or maybe you shouldn't take a certain drug at all because it interferes with something else that you're already taking. It's very complicated, and researchers really have a job on their hands. So sometimes drugs can't be absorbed very easily. They're compounds and they can't be absorbed easily. Others are absorbed faster, and so therefore that determines how fast it's going to be before you get a reaction from the drug. So most drugs must be absorbed into the bloodstream to be effective, and you can take a drug by mouth and it'll digest and get into the bloodstream. And by the way, the reason you can't take insulin by mouth is the fact that it'll digest as a food. By the time it gets into the bloodstream, it has no effect at all in lowering blood sugar, and that's the reason why you would have to have a shot to have insulin. Because it goes directly into the bloodstream and it bypasses the digestion, and so therefore it goes in as insulin, and it reduces the blood sugar as it should. Because if you're taking it by mouth, you've got to realize that there is going to be some digestion involved, and that could also change the effects of the drug, which is why you can't use insulin that way. But you can take drugs by mouth, you can take them in the rectum, they can be injected, they can be inhaled, they can be injected under the skin so that it's absorbed by the skin and doesn't go through digestion. And all of those ways of taking drugs are also studied as to which is the most effective way to take the drug to get it into where it needs to be so that it can do what it's supposed to do. Topical medications, if you have an infection, say you have an infection in your foot, it goes on your foot. And then you don't go through a digestive process. The medication is applied directly to wherever the wound is. Others you have to take by mouth, and it has to go into your bloodstream through the mouth. It gets absorbed by the intestinal walls, by the stomach walls. And so there are various ways of taking the drugs, and that determines also the time that it takes for you to respond to it. Well, I'm going to close it here because we do have, I'm getting close on time. And here again, we have the National Hotline Substance Abuse, which is 800-662-4357. and the New Hampshire Narcotics Anonymous, which is 1-603-645-4777, and Alcoholics Anonymous, which is 1-800-593-3330. We will be showing these as long as I'm dealing with drugs in the show, and I like to keep it up long enough for somebody to grab a paper and pencil and write those numbers down if you need them. And if you don't need them, write them down anyway, because you probably have some friends that need them. So those are the numbers, and we'll just keep them up every show that I do as long as we're dealing with drug addiction. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time. We'll continue.